Call on stage our first presenter of the morning, and I'm sure she's going to turn it up a notch. We're talking about Mariam Robinson, and she's the CEO of First Global Bank. And Mariam is the president and CEO of First Global Bank, a post that she assumed on February 1, 2016. Just like a well. Just like a well. But she has been a member of the board of First Global Bank all along. She was also a partner at a Caribbean-focused private equity fund, Portland Private Equity, where she led the fund's due diligence process and portfolio monitoring for her closed deals for 7 years. Prior to joining the private equity industry, the Jamaican 1998 Rhodes Scholar worked as a management consultant at the top global strategy consulting firm for 8 years, advising CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and their management teams on growth strategy operations. She's an alumnus of McKinsey & Company and Bain & Company, where she left as an engagement manager in the New York office. Mariam was nominated and named a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum in 2014. Ladies, she's coming to turn it up. Welcome her.
We're ready for the road.
All protocols observed. Good morning, ladies. All right. Okay, so this morning, what I would like to speak to you about is how to get financing for your projects. I'm going to be speaking to you about both on the equity side, which I spent quite a bit of time in, as well as on the debt side. My belief is that no matter what stage your business is in, whether it's a startup, a business that has just become cash flow positive, or it's an established corporation, all businesses need equity financing at some point during their journey. And I believe if you find the right source of capital and you're very clear about the process and what investors are looking for, there's no reason why you should not get funding. Okay? So, our objectives today, I want to speak to you about what are the sources of funding. When I got into the private equity industry in the Caribbean 7 years ago, there were very few sources of equity funding. Today, there are quite a few, and I want to speak a little bit about that, because a number of folks say, you know, my pain point is where do I find financing? And I can tell you, certainly banks have been around for a long time, and now we have a lot more sources of equity as well. I'd also like to talk to you about how to actually go about securing the financing and some things to avoid. So, as an entrepreneur, because there might be some in the room, who in the room would consider themselves an entrepreneur, just by show of hands? Okay, good, so this slide is relevant. Okay, cool. Okay, so when you're thinking about at what stage in your business cycle would you be looking for financing, the first is right after you have that business model. So not just a business plan, but also this business model, you will need some financing. And then after you've gotten to what I call cash flow positive, so you've built out your team, you've started your operations, you're going to need growth equity. Because as banks will provide financing, they're also looking for what you will either put into your business from your own cash flows, which qualifies as equity, or equity capital from external sources. So let's talk about the sources of capital for all of us here in the room today. And I do agree that capital is a source of power, and we in the room need to know exactly how to go about securing that capital. So the first three sources would be personal funds. So this is where you get funds from family and friends. That can be advantageous because you can get some favorable terms, because family and friends may not be so picky. But should things not go well, it's highly awkward. High net worth individuals is another source of capital. These would be, about 3 or 4 years ago in Jamaica, really hard to access. I mean, if you didn't grow up in the family, hang out with the families, it was really hard to access these high net worth individuals available to all Jamaicans. Well, now, led by the work of the Development Bank of Jamaica in building out a VCPE ecosystem, we have 2 angel networks in Jamaica. We have one in Kingston called First Angels Jamaica, and we have one in Montego Bay called Alpha Angels. And I'm a member of the one in Kingston. We've done some deals already. It's a very well-managed and active network managed by Sandra Glasgow. And so high net worth individuals can be a source of financing for your business, and it usually is when you're at the very early stage. You have an idea that has been turned into a business model, but you need to scale. So I put, by the way, the color coding. Green means very available in Jamaica, been around for a long time. Yellow means emerging. So banks have been around for a long time. So I will be talking about this a little bit later in the presentation. And then venture capital and private equity is really what I want to spend the next 10 minutes speaking about, because what we found in the Caribbean, not just in Jamaica, is that we had to go around and make the market. There were a lot of myths within the various private sectors in the countries in the Caribbean about what private equity really is and what does it mean when you take on an equity partner. So let's just get through the formatting here. So what are the things that investors typically look for? Well, the first thing is they're looking for a very clear plan. What it is that you need this financing for. What I always tell people, regardless of the stage of your business, what is the transformative growth strategy that you're looking to fund? Because ultimately, this capital is very expensive, and we want to be really clear about why it is you're looking for equity financing. The goal, ladies and gentlemen, is that you would be taking this capital in for about 5 to 7 years in your business with the idea of refinancing to lower cost capital. So this, again, is just to get you through the growth phase for your company. You must be clear about why you will win. Why should someone back you? How are you going to win in your industry? And it's very important to have the financials. I can't tell you how many people have come to me with really good ideas, a business plan, sort of, and then they say, but I'm just not a numbers person when I ask them about the numbers. What are the returns that you expect? I don't reach there yet. If you don't reach there yet, you're you're not ready yet to come in front of an equity investor. That's very important. The other thing is, sometimes people think, boy, my business idea and model has a few risks. You know, I'm not sure about it. I don't know if people accept it. It's never been done before in Jamaica or in the Caribbean. And what I would say is that's not a deal breaker. When you're upfront about the risks that you see in your business, and again, this is applicable for an early stage company as well as a very established corporation, be very clear about what the risks are and what you're going to do about mitigating those risks. Investors, especially equity investors, we're very comfortable with risk, but we need to know that the management team is thinking about this and they have good ideas and solutions for addressing the risk. The third thing that people look for is what we call a strong management team. Now, obviously, if it's an established corporation, the team has been working together for a while, so they're strong. We can look at your track record. But if you're earlier stage, for those that raised your hands as entrepreneurs here in this room, and you say, well, I just got together with this person 6 months ago, so we don't have enough of a strong team to be able to show. How will we be able to show that we're a strong team? Well, things like saying we went to school together, we work on projects at church together, we sit on committees together. What we as the investor, what we're looking for is that you understand how to work together, you understand how to make decisions, and there's not just one person who is essentially running the show. We want to know that there will be debate. When things go wrong, people will force the conversation, and clear decision making will take place. So you can be creative in saying, how do we demonstrate a track record as a team, even if you're an early stage company? Okay, the fourth thing is this idea about skin in the game. What does that mean? Now, this is one of the areas that trips up a lot of companies. There are people who will come to us, have come to us, and they'll say, listen, I have a good idea. I want to set up a data center in Barbados. I have a lot of experience doing data centers in North America. I've pulled together a team. I just need 15 million US to do it, right? So we'll say, great. And they'll say, I'm thinking I should get about 20% of the company. And we say, great. So we'll put in 80% of the equity capital, and you'll put in the 20%. And they'll say, we're not rich like that. So we don't have skin in the game, because if we put in all the capital and things go awry, our reputation is damaged, but the entrepreneur's reputation stays intact, and they move on to the next project. So what investors are looking for is alignment and skin in the game, something that says, if this project doesn't work, if this investment doesn't work, you will be really damaged as much as the investor will be damaged. And by damage, I just mean it can be more qualitative, soft skills damaged, and it can also be financially damaged, meaning that you have put X% of your net worth into this business. So skin in the game is very important, and I will say a lot of getting financing, especially on the equity side, is about how you come to the table. How prepared are you? How knowledgeable are you? And if you sit in front of an investor and you say, listen, I want to talk about alignment and skin in the game, you're already off to a good start because they'll know that you're very prepared. So let's go back to that data center example, because you might say to yourself, well, I'm doing all this work, I have no equity, so I can never compete with the pockets that's going to put 15 million in. So what do I do? Well, you can use this concept called earning in. So what you'll say is, all right, 20% is too much, because really, if it doesn't go well, you lose out. I'm fine. I've only put in my foregone salary and maybe some setup costs. So why don't I get 5% on day one? Let's come up with some milestones. And as I hit those milestones, I earn in X% till I get to what we agree on as the peak. Anything more than 20% is a little bit weird, so let's assume 20%. And so over the next couple of years, I can, as the entrepreneur, can earn in my 20%. Now you have excellent alignment, because as things go well, the entrepreneur enjoys in that upside, and as things don't go so well, the investor, the firm, has full control of the project anyway to figure out what to do. So the skin in the game is very important. And then finally, this usually gets lost on a lot of people. They'll come with their financials, they'll come with their projections, and we'll say, great, so what are your sources and uses of funds? And they'll say, well, I've already provided my financials. I know, but I need to know, how are you using the funds? It's a very quick exercise, particularly after doing your financials, but you should be very clear about what are the uses of funds for this equity capital. So, assuming all of that, ultimately what it boils down to, ladies and gentlemen, is that it's really important to understand where folks are coming from, because you're still not going to get perfect alignment. The goal of us as entrepreneurs, and I'm jumping on all sides, but the goal of us as entrepreneurs is really to raise cash, raise funds, without giving away too much of our company, right? I mean, that's ultimately what we want to do. And some of the things, some of the tension points will be around valuation, what type of security you want to use, and this is not security on the bank financing side. This is security like, are you going to use preference shares, common shares? Are you going to use part debt that can convert into equity? Really have to think about what instrument you're going to use. That's the entrepreneur. On the investor side, we're trying to figure out how we match risk and reward. And as a rule of thumb, the Caribbean, including Jamaica, most equity investors are looking for at least 20% per annum. So if you're going to invest in a very well-established company, 20% returns, what you're looking for, 20% IRR. And as the risk steps up, it's a startup in an industry that's just being formed, you're getting up into the 30+% range. So given this is a tension, you can come to the table understanding what the motivations are of the investors that you're sitting across the table from and what your own goals are as an entrepreneur. So I want to spend a little bit of time on this slide. So I've given a few talks on this particular subject. I'm very passionate about equity financing as well as debt now. And you know, what I've found is that there are a lot of myths around how to secure equity for your businesses. And so I just want to talk about some of the things that, just practical things. What do I do tomorrow if I'm looking for equity? The first thing is we need to put an NDA in place, right? So do you have one? And, you know, depending on what stage your business is in, you can Google NDA and then tailor it to your situation. Or your investor that you're talking to might have one. But you always want to make sure that before you get too far in the process, you put together an NDA. I will say, though, that you should have a business plan or a teaser on your company that's maybe a 1 or 2 page that really hits the highlights that you can share with anyone, and it doesn't actually have to sit behind the NDA, because you want to get the investor interested in taking the conversation, not just taking the meeting with you, but starting to dig into some of the details. This second one around valuation is really the biggest pain point I've seen in the Caribbean. Actually, it's global. So what usually happens is we think our business is worth one thing, some amount, and the investor thinks something else. About 2-3 years ago, I was looking at a business in the northwest of the United States, and it was a soybean processing business, a non-GMO soybean processing business, as well as a seed bank. So they have all these seeds that can work in any environment, and they're non-GMO, which is actually pretty powerful because I don't know if you guys know much about the food industry and the food dynamics, which I learned about and was very fascinated by. But Monsanto, I won't say too much about Monsanto, but I'll just say that Monsanto was buying up a lot of the small non-GMO players to ensure that they maintain their market position, which is GMO focused. In fact, fun fact, digression, do you know that in Jamaica, most of the food that we eat is GMO? Yeah, I was shocked by that. Shocking. Anyhow, so we thought this company would be a great fit to export the model of this company to the Caribbean. So that's why we looked at it, despite the fact that we are a Caribbean fund, but this was an American company. Anyhow, so this company, we did the analysis, and there are many different ways, really 3, to look at the valuation of a company. And once I can certainly sit with you and tell you, you don't have to hire people to really do this. If you have good financials, valuation is as much an art as a science. You want to come up with 2 to 3 data points on what the value is and just show a range. But essentially, we done the analysis, and it was worth $20 million US. Okay? This is based on historical information and what we projected the future to look like. They did their own analysis, and they came up with $200 million. It's a huge gap. And the way they were really doing their analysis was the fact their thought was the seed bank could be licensed to healthcare companies, and they'd make a lot of money. The only trick with that is that they'd never done it before, and they've been in business for 20 years. So we have a huge gap. Now, it's very, very, very difficult and awkward to negotiate 20 million and 200 million and get to some midpoint, because both sides are not only losing out in value, but there's trust that gets eroded through the process. When you find that there's a big difference in valuation when you're looking for financing, it's not a deal breaker. There's a way to get around it. These differences in valuations can always be structured away. What we did, because we did make the investment, it was a very good investment for us at the time when I was at Portland. What we did is we structured a debenture with an ability to, so a 3-year debenture, 8%, with an ability to convert to equity at a discount should things go well. So suddenly you're aligned again. We're saying, okay, we'll get into business with you and partner with you, and over the next 3 years, you'll pay us 8% like it's a loan. But if we think that things are going well, when the loan matures, instead of receiving all this cash, we'll just convert it as if it's equity in the company. We'll have a 3-year runway, so at that point, we should agree on what we think the company is worth. We certainly should be a lot closer. And so now everybody's happy. You don't have to have the awkward, fight it out about valuation, and we were able to move forward and do the deal. So the takeaway here is that if there's a big difference in what you think your company is worth and what the investor thinks your company is worth, you can structure away that difference. Do not feel like you have to remove yourself from the table. So that's valuation. On security, depending on what stage your business is at, you have to think about whether it should be debt or equity. Debt is generally preferable because it's a lower cost of capital, essentially. But you might be already at that ceiling in terms of how much debt your company can carry. And remember, you have to pay interest over time. So the cash flows of the business will be impacted in the near term from debt. Whereas with equity, you don't have to really, depending on how it's structured, you may not have to pay anything until an exit, which is when either we sell your company, we list it on the Jamaica Stock Exchange, etc. So there's some relief to the cash flow in the near term when you take on equity. And then similarly, if we just stay on the equity portion, if you've decided to go that route, there are preference shares, and then there are common shares. And it just depends. I think it's always better as the investor to push for common shares. Not the investor, the entrepreneur to push for common shares. But should the investor want more security and to be ahead in the cap table, they might ask for preference shares. I always tell people to Google these things because it's amazing what you can find on Google. Okay, I found it out when I was having my child. Okay, so covenants, to my husband's distress. Okay, covenants. So the myth that I wanted to dispel here is that private equity companies, like what you see in North America, like what's in the news, really look to take a majority stake in companies. That is not the case in emerging markets. Most funds are looking to invest and take a minority stake in most businesses. And here's why. Most of the businesses in Jamaica and the Caribbean are owned by persons, families, right? That's just how it is. Lots of family-owned businesses. And we want to make sure that the families stay motivated and engaged to ensure that the investor gets the returns that they're looking for. If we end up taking a majority stake, we as the investor takes a majority stake in these businesses, then that could reduce the motivation level and therefore the success of the company. So a lot of funds in not just the Caribbean, but Africa, Asia, Latin America, they will take minority stakes in companies. The way they get around this, though, to always, again, ensure that alignment, so to protect the investor, they will come up with these covenants. So you'll have negative covenants. This should be familiar to most of you because this is not just specific to equity investing, but they're standard shareholder, minority shareholder protective provisions that you would put in any document or any transaction to ensure that the investor is protected in spite of having a minority stake. The second to last thing is around governance. This is a very important one because I was looking at a deal in Jamaica the other day, so like a year ago, and the person said to me, boy, Miriam, I don't know if we want, I like you, you know, but I don't know if I want your company on my board, in my business, you know, we're very private. And we said, listen, let me explain this whole board seat thing. So first of all, let me explain why investors look for board representation. So this is industry-wide. This is standard. Most folks that are putting in equity capital, even the First Angels Jamaica, Alpha Angels, we're looking for board representation. And it's because, as a fund, you need to show that you are very clear about how the company is being managed. So from a governance standpoint, investors in the fund who then invest in your company, they get comfort from that. But then if I was just investing my own money as an angel investor, I want to know that I can help set the strategy, help the company with networking, help the company remove obstacles and brainstorm issues. And if I'm not on the board, I'm not really doing that. In fact, I'm not thinking much about the company. So you really want to actually challenge investors to come onto your boards, and usually they don't make trouble. They actually usually help to grow your company. They would take 1 or 2 board seats. It's usually on a pro rata basis based on how much capital they're putting into the company versus the worth of the value of your company. So I think the board seat is very critical. And then if you have a fund investing in your company, not just an individual, that person who's a part of the fund team, they keep everything confidential except the things that are relevant to the performance of the fund. So that's very important. So if Marion McIntosh Robinson of Portland Private Equity sits on Financial Company X's board, I'm only sharing with my Portland team the key things like we're going to have an exit soon, we're about to list on the stock exchange, or the financials don't look good, and here's what we're doing to course correct. But I don't share all the other confidential details because A, the team doesn't really care. I mean, it's not relevant. But B, we are restricted as to what you can share when you're on a board. Okay, so I would just like to dispel the myth that equity investors coming onto the board will wreak havoc and tell you secrets and tell you business. That is not the case. And then finally, I keep coming back to this point about use of funds. It seems very simple, but a lot of people just kind of come and say, I want to use the funds to grow. Grow how? Well, I'm going to invest in some equipment and buy something. No, no, no. Tell me very specifically what you're using the funds for. It can still be 3 or 4 lines, but I need to know that they're the summary lines of deep thought as to how you're going to use this money. Okay? So that's it on equity. All right, so let's move to debt now. All right, so on the debt side, how to get a business loan. I think most of you are familiar with this, but I have to tell you, now that I'm at First Global in a management capacity, so much more into the day-to-day details, it's really amazing how much of us just don't know what is required to get a bank loan. So what will happen is you'll meet with your relationship manager, and they'll say, here are the things that they need to get. Here are the things that you need to provide. And people will be like, really? I didn't know that. So for me, you know, I'm very big on this whole idea that, and I see it already happening in the industry, the banking sector, but I'm big on this whole idea that banks cannot just operate as banks. Banks need to operate as consumer-oriented companies. So we need to make it really easy for the Jamaican citizen to do business with us. And so there should be somewhere you can go to just know what is required from a bank to get a loan, because it doesn't really change every day. So you just need to know one time, and then you just need to know what to do to get those materials to your respective relationship manager. So I'm always boggled when people are not sure about what it is, and the blame falls on us as banks, and it's one of the things that we're working on improving. But here's what you need. So we need cash flow projections. And by the way, when I finish this list, I'd love to know who is surprised. Anything on here is surprising to anyone in here. But we need cash flow projections so we can know what exactly can your business growth or your view of your business growth support the loan that we're going to give you, right? Because you'll be paying interest out of the projected cash flow. And we take that and then do our own analysis as to we stress test the cash flows as to what risk is involved in providing this loan to your business. Bank statements. So the takeaway here is if you're starting a business, go and open a bank account. Because once you have a bank account, you'll have bank statements. Because sometimes people come and they're like, we don't have any bank statements. We all provide statements to you guys. Okay, the third is in-house financials. So depending on the stage of the business, just provide us with your in-house financials, please. This would be historicals, because you might say, well, how does that relate to cash flow projections? Cash flow projections, a view of the business, and we tend to be very, very optimistic as owners of businesses about the view of our businesses, but that's okay. We just want to know what the assumptions are and that it's well thought through. And then in-house financials is what has already occurred. Now, if you're an early stage company, you won't have a long runway of in-house financials. That's okay. But we want to know that you have financials because we're looking at your governance, we're looking at your reporting. It tells us about your internal controls. And if you're a startup and you don't have audited financials, we will take your management accounts. We will take the financials that you have already. Remember, as banks, we're trying to assess your risk level to figure out, just like on the equity side, whether or not to give you this loan. The fourth thing is the business plan. Yeah, that came up in the equity side too, right? So just go out there, we can't get away from it, write that plan, and in some instances, in fact, most instances now, business plans are not sufficient. They want you to see that you've thought through the business model. It's still the same planning, it's just the way, it's the elements that you have in that Word document that you provide. So I'll give you a little tip. So people have come to me and they've said, you know, Mariam, it'd be so nice if you could just write my business plan for me. And I always say, man, my red flag goes up. Because if someone has an idea, right, in fact, they've been doing some work for a while, and they say, can you write, so a third party write your business plan? I say, no, you're in trouble. I'm not putting my capital with you. Because the best person to write the business plan is the owner of the business. So I think it looks weird, especially if you go up to an investor and say, listen, can you help me out with this plan? No. You write the business plan yourself, and then you can reach out to various professionals to look at it. But never, well, I hope there are no business plan professionals in here that charge for this. But my thought is you really shouldn't be hiring somebody to write your business plan. But you can if you want to. I don't want to get into trouble here. This is my own personal view. Okay, fifth thing is around collateral. So unlike equity, where there's a little bit more room and flexibility in terms of this kind of security for the cash that they're going to be giving to your company, on the bank side, we need to see collateral. And that is very real. And we're a very regulated industry, so if a bank tells you that you don't need any collateral at all, that's weird. So you're going to need collateral for any kind of loan that you're looking for. I know that there's been talk about renewable energy and, you know, what type of collateral are banks providing for renewable energy projects. The projects that don't have a lot of equipment and hard assets, that's obviously very easy to value for banks and outside valuators. But that is a conversation that is continuing. So someone who comes to me and says, I have a biomass idea, right, and they have a number of contracts that's come together to form the idea, they're not going to have a lot of collateral. I have my own personal belief about why we should be lending to them, but again, we need to ensure that we're always on side with our regulators. So sometimes when you hear street talk about, man, those banks, they're not flexible enough, they don't understand, I have a great idea in business, why they don't give us financing, we are also regulated. So that's usually what's going on there. And then finally, terms of the loan. So we're looking, usually you have to pay a fee up front, so don't balk. Not supposed to be very high though, but you're supposed to pay a fee up front to cover the processing costs for the bank. Then you'll be priced, the loan will be priced, so you'll have some interest rate. And then depending on the sector that you're in and just the nature of your business, there's a possibility of a moratorium. But you know what all of this tells me, folks? Ultimately, what I believe, and I was a very, and still am, a very picky banking customer. I mean, I demand good service when I go into banks, and I know as a sector we have a lot of work to do there. But everybody in here who has a business, who's going to set up a business, you need to have a relationship with your bank. So whoever your banker is now, just make sure that you check in with them quarterly. Let them know what your idea is. Because we want to lend you money, but we need to make sure we understand your business, and we need to make sure that we can price the risk of your business appropriately. And the more we're in conversation with you, the better it is. I thought this was just interesting to show you how banks work, sort of. Essentially, you talk to somebody who's a relationship manager at the top, which is where the request will originate, and we'll gather information from you. The reason why I want to show this slide is that first step can take a long time. It's very iterative. So what I would like is for everyone in here to know exactly what banks require, and we're doing some work on that at First Global Bank, so it's really clear to the public what I must come into the branch or speak to my RM about, so you don't have this back and forth about collecting information. All right? But once you get information now, we look at it, this is the underwriting stage. It would be the equivalent of the due diligence stage on the equity side. So this is what you'll see on the loan side. Underwriting, adjudication, and then you'll have the approval. And so once approval happens, you will hear as the customer, and then we have to go into this document preparation and then disbursement. Now, the thing that's interesting here, and what I've challenged my team, and they're already doing it, but really kind of formalizing, what we need to formalize is at every point of every stage of the process, we should be checking back in with you, right? So like, if you have sent information to us and we're processing a loan, we should say, yeah man, it's going to credit committee, we'll let you know. Oops, we declined, sorry. But at least we've been in touch with you. I think what tends to happen is that there's a vacuum, and then you find out. And then that makes you angry, right? Yes. So as a sector, we need to not have pockets of excellence, because we do. The banks are doing this across the board. We need to just standardize it, that this is just the way we operate in Jamaica. Anyone wants a loan from us, we keep them in the loop. Because the people who come to me with good feedback, I notice that's the common theme. Regardless of what the price of the loan was, it was the way in which we kept in touch with them through that process. Okay, so just to wrap up, I got the sign. So ultimately, I really believe that when you're informed, ladies and gentlemen, there's no reason why you should not get capital for your business, whether it's equity or debt. And so to just remind you of some pitfalls to avoid, sometimes people focus too much on their idea, and they keep going and going on their idea. But a lot of difficulties that businesses have is not that they had the wrong idea, it's just they don't have enough management. And I'd go as far as to say management around implementation. You know, there's some people who, whatever you give them, things will get done. And then there are others, you just never know when it will get done. So that's a pitfall to avoid. Sometimes, so that's number one. 2, not asking for enough money. And what does that mean? Particularly on the equity side, if you really believe your business needs 5 million and you go out and ask for 2 million, it's very bad, because equity investors get really annoyed. And if they're very good with their diligence, they'll tell you need more, because they don't want to know that you're going to run out of cash and you need to come back to the table before you've hit a meaningful milestone defined by the transformative growth strategy that I spoke about, which is what equity capital likes to chase. The third is having too many lenders and investors, especially it gets very tricky in the early stage when you have the various series. So you probably need to just be very mindful and careful of that. The fourth is around failure to get proper legal agreements. At the very least, do an NDA. And then as you are in diligence with an investor, then start to talk to them about, figure out who you should hire as counsel to review the final documents. It's not a very costly process for this stage. And then fifth, poor cash flow management. And this is just a general, once you've gotten the money, if you're not managing your cash, because cash is key, cash is king, cash is queen, it's very important to have a grasp on your cash so that both the banks and equity investors feel as if you're going to be able to pay them back. I mean, ultimately, that's what it boils down to. And then, of course, the half-baked business plan. But if you're writing a business plan, something tells me it won't be half-baked. So, ladies and gentlemen, I really believe that everyone should be able to secure capital, whether equity, and I've hopefully dispelled the myths because I realize there's not a lot of information out there on equity. And then on debt, because as banks, there are pockets of excellence where we share this information with you, but as a sector, we're going to be raising our game. Certainly at First Global Bank, we have to, in terms of making this a standard way of getting that information to you so you know exactly what you want when you speak to our RM. Thank you very, very much.